Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donohue, and although Penn State football is now into week 2 of spring practices, midway through that second week, and we have pro day up ahead on Friday, Penn State basketball remains the center topic of discussion on another episode of the Lions 24/7 podcast because those Nittany Lions, fresh off a first NCAA tournament win in 22 years, they need a new coach. Micah Shrewsberry leaving for Notre Dame, reportedly on a 7-year deal. That news surfacing on Wednesday afternoon. And there have been thousands upon thousands of words written at this point, maybe tens of thousands, at Lions 24/7 during the recent days from our staff, from our message board members, illustrating, I think, the intensity and the emotions that are involved in this particular moment for Penn State basketball. Fortunately, my teammates are two of the very best on the Penn State basketball beat. We get to tap into their insight here on the show whenever we want. We're doing that right now. It's time, all hands on deck with our basketball beat guys, Mark Brennan, Daniel Gallen, back with us once more. We had you last episode, and it was the culmination of the Penn State season was the focus, and we left wondering what would happen next with Micah Shrewsberry. Had a sense it would probably get resolved one way or the other before we step back in to record. It's a dreary, rainy, cloudy morning here on a Thursday in Happy Valley, maybe setting the tone for the mood around campus right now. Mark Brennan, would love to hear your initial reaction, and then we'll go right to you, Daniel, after that. What you thought as the moments passed on Thursday and Wednesday afternoon and this thing became official.
Yeah, I don't think there's any other way to look at it than the last two times Penn State has gone to the NCAA tournament in 2011 and now in 2023. The head coach left afterward. Now the Ed DiCello situation was different. I mean, Ed, I think was getting a little tired of banging his head against the wall at Penn State. That maybe the commitment to hoops wasn't quite there, and he actually moved down a level. And he's been at Navy, and I think that's been a comfort zone for him. They haven't had great success, but they haven't been terrible either. They've been a good program, and it's Navy. They're worried about protecting our country more than they are about fielding a great basketball team. This one is different. This is a guy who in 2 years, Micah Shrewsberry, stamped himself as a true up-and-comer on the national scene. If you look at what he was able to do in the Big Ten and then the NCAA tournament, they were wearing that blue jersey in every game. That signifies that they were the lower seed. They were underdogs in every game. He was going against more veteran coaches. He was going against more talented lineups. And they outright won 4 of those games. And the other 2 games they lost were to the number 3 and to the number 5 team in the country by a total of 7 points. And as all this is going on, the news starts to break, clearly coming from Shrewsberry's agent, who set the narrative, which is his job, or which is the agent's job, to set the narrative that Georgetown was interested, that Notre Dame was interested. And then the funniest part of all of this was that when Cooley goes from Providence to Georgetown to take that job, it wasn't 15 seconds until news came out that Providence was interested in Shrewsberry. The agent setting the tone, getting the message out there the whole time. And what did we get from Penn State that whole time? Nothing. As outgoing as Pat Kraft is, he didn't even contribute to the narrative. Now, would it have made a difference? I don't know. Maybe it would have, maybe it wouldn't have, but I'm still kind of scratching my head over the fact that you have this outgoing, obviously very intelligent athletic director, and he never even contributed to the narrative. And this was in stark contrast to what we saw from Sandy Barber when stuff was going down, not at the end with Pat Chambers. They completely botched that when they fired him right before the season. If they were going to let him go, they should have done it the previous summer. But anytime that we were at the Big Ten tournament, or at the NIT or whenever, and there were questions about Pat Chambers' future, she met with the media there and addressed them. Now, what would did she ever give definitive answers? No, but she at least contributed to the narrative. And that's the one part out of all of this that I'm still scratching my head over. And I wrote a column about it, and I think the important part of that narrative isn't to necessarily say, hey, they wanted to do what they could do to keep Shrewsberry, because I think they did try to do what they could do. I think the money was there. But I think sooner or later, Pat Kraft has to come out with a strong comment that Penn State needs to step it up, and not necessarily Penn State per se, but the people who back Penn State on the NIL front. Because to me, I think that was one of the biggest issues here is that Micah Shrewsberry, yeah, he's an Indiana guy. He's going back to Notre Dame. I think he's saying all the right things, but I also truly believe that there were concerns that Penn State wasn't going to have the NIL juice to compete with some of these other people in men's basketball. And I think that's up to the athletic director, Pat Kraft, to make sure that that message is out there that Penn State is going to do, or the people who back Penn State are going to do what needs to be done for Penn State to compete in that space. So I know that was a lot, but I wanted to get it across.
Mark, I promise we're coming back to you because the infrastructure aspect of this, the NIL aspect of this, Pat Kraft aspect of it, they're all still on campus. The Micah Shrewsberry aspect of it is gone. So those are the things we have to chew on and discuss a little bit more. But Daniel, just off the cuff here, as this decision came through yesterday, one we were waiting on, one that was going to determine a lot about the way we're going to cover this basketball team in the coming days, weeks, and months. What are you thinking about things as the dust settles? And you were just speaking with Micah Shrewsberry days ago in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a pretty big blow for the Penn State program, in the short term with what the team is going to look like next year, and in the long term with what Micah Shrewsberry was trying to build and what could be built at Penn State. I mean, I don't necessarily think a lot of people saw Micah Shrewsberry as a lifer at Penn State. I think that he was someone where his trajectory, his arrow is pointed up. Whether that's going to a real blue blood job, whether that's going to the NBA. I think that given his talent and given what he's shown, I think that that's where he'll ultimately end up. I don't think in 10 years he would still be at Penn State. Maybe you get 4 or 5 years out of him. Maybe having Braden Shrewsberry coming in would allow him to stick around for a little bit more. But I think that Penn State needs to get itself into a position where it can keep guys around for 4 or 5 years, or it can put the infrastructure in place, have the resources where someone isn't necessarily looking around after 2 years, or where a school like Notre Dame, which has had more basketball success in recent history. I mean, Mike Brey's run was long and it was successful. That someone like that can't come in and poach a coach away. I mean, it's one of those things where in theory, it kind of, in your head, you're like, okay, if, you become a place that young and up and coming coaches want to come to, they want to spend a couple years there and then have the opportunity to parlay that into something else. In theory, that might sound pretty good for certain respects, from an athletic director's perspective, from a program visibility perspective. But when you're actually in that and it's actually happening, I think it's a little bit tougher to stomach. So, there's a lot, I think, to unpack from this, but I think that just when you look at what Micah Shrewsberry was able to do in his 2 years, I think that it's a pretty remarkable coaching job. The amount of games that he was able to win in his first 2 years, the success that he had them at, and what they were poised to do. I mean, I think that there was going to be serious momentum from this season. They were losing a lot, and I saw some chatter that, he left because, they were, the roster was going to be bare, that it was going to be a rebuild, that, that things were gutted. So it was a good time to leave. I don't fault Shrewsberry for capitalizing on his value and leaving for Notre Dame. But, I think that the staff knew that this is what the roster was going to look like at this point, at this time of year, when they signed those 3 guys in November. You knew that Seth Lundy might go to the NBA. You knew that you might have some attrition, which we saw yesterday before this news with Dalian Johnson and Caleb Dorsey going into the transfer portal. And so you knew you might be in a situation where you have 8 guys who are all sophomores and freshmen next year, but that's what the transfer portal is for. They were, I think, very well poised. The staff was to capitalize on the success that they had and add people through the transfer portal. I think Penn State was going to be a destination based off of what Jalen Pickett, Andrew Funk, and Cam Winter did. So I think that there is a lot going on. I don't necessarily think that this roster as it stood right now was a reason for leaving. But it's just there's a lot to sift through. And I lost my train of thought going on there. But, I think that this is just a pretty big loss for Penn State. And it's going to be really, really interesting to see what direction you go in next.
You both clearly have plenty to say about the subject, and you're going to be covering it in depth over at Lions247.com. Already here on Thursday morning, Daniel has a pretty significant list of potential candidates for this job, including someone we'll get to in a bit who's already here on campus. Mark has his column up. I know Tyler Calvaruso, who we're going to hear from in just a while, talking about what's hanging in the balance from a transfer portal and recruiting perspective with this vacancy now open. Something else, though, we got to really hammer home here, Mark, is the fact that on the surface level, this was maybe a stare down or a poker game with a few players. It was the administration here in State College, the administration at Notre Dame in South Bend, and then Micah Shrewsberry and his agent. But the dynamics here in Happy Valley, and we heard about this during James Franklin's contract negotiations last year, and it seems to be simmering right now. You look at our message board, it's on fire right now. The dynamic of the internal conflict about the direction that this athletic department needs to move forward in 2023 and beyond, with everything that is changing in college athletics. You have as much knowledge of anyone that I know around Nittany Lions sports for the past few decades. So tell me how it got to this point and what the hell happens next.
Yeah, I think the key is that Penn State has to make sure that it is well positioned on the NIL front for football and men's basketball first and foremost. That's not to say that every other sport should not be taken care of on the NIL front. But the bottom line is, if you don't have football and men's basketball well positioned, they are the revenue generating sports. Obviously football and then men's basketball, but it's not the number that men's hoops brings in is significant. It's not like it's nothing. But you need those to be healthy and able to compete at the national level. And I think they're further along with football, but maybe not quite where they should be. But I think they'd have to get there in hoops if they hope to be competitive. And that's what we're going to find out. I mean, I think we found out a little bit just now, but moving forward, what are we going to see on that front? Are we going to see coaches who basically have to beg, hey, we need to be able to generate money. They have to be able to do that. And again, this is not a knock on all of the non-revenue sports. That's great. But the fact of the matter is something is paying for this entire athletic department, and it's the major sports. It's football and it's men's hoops. So they really have to position themselves to take care of those two things. And that's going to play a real key. The messaging on that front, especially with hoops, because they're locked into their football coach for years now. But with hoops, now you're trying to bring somebody in, and you better be able to get that message across to whoever the next coach is going to be or might be, that they are going to have the support that they need on that front, that they could compete. And going back to what Daniel said, it's not only in recruiting players, it's in retaining players. And again, I know people hate this. I know there are a lot of people who are like, why should these players be getting money? That's not the issue. They are getting money. And if they're not going to get it here, they're going to get it somewhere else. So if you want to compete, you have to be viable in that space. And I think that is the biggest thing. We could talk about arguments and debates and everything else, but I don't think there is any debating that if they want to be consistently successful in basketball, that they are going to have, if they want to be going to the NCAA tournament more than once every 22 years, and in fairness, they would have gone in 20 if not for the pandemic. So that may be a little bit unfair, but they are going to have to take care of things from that perspective. And I think the sooner that Pat Kraft is more perfectly clear about that, the better, because I don't think he has been perfectly clear publicly. I think he has to come out and say this stuff definitively, if only to let prospective hoops coach candidates know, and to also let potential recruits know.
Isn't what's hidden behind the facility walls right now, or hidden in the closed door conversations, is what really needs to be let know is the people who carry a lot of wallets, the people who carry a lot of weight among factions of this fans. And it sounds like, Mark, that there wasn't necessarily a lot of that virtual reach out going on during a really exciting time for the fan base. So you're going off of word of mouth a lot. And you're going maybe trying to target some people who aren't as prevalent on social media, aren't always engaged with the program. Didn't seem maybe that there was that wave.
Whose job is
on
it,
the momentum.
Tyler? Whose job is it to let the fans know? Whose job? Who is the voice of the athletic department? I mean, you can't be depending on James Franklin to do this all the time. This is why you brought Pat Kraft in, because he's a dynamic personality, because he can get that message out there. And the sooner he does that, the better it's going to be for Penn State. Now, it's obviously too late in this regard. And again, would it have mattered? It may not have mattered. Shrewsberry may well have just wanted to go back to Indiana anyway. But if nothing else, at least send a message that fans understand what it's going to take. And it may not be an easy message for them to hear, but at least let them know what it's going to take. And if they decide not to back the program, then that's their prerogative. But at least let them understand. I can tell you this much, that I've covered Penn State hoops forever. And the reason I love covering the program is because when they get on these runs, everybody starts loving hoops. And it's fun to cover, and people get into it. And I can't tell you whether it was going to get this fantastic haircut, whether I'm going to the store. As all this is unfolding, everybody's asking me about hoops. Everybody's talking about hoops. You go onto our message board, people talking about hoops, people mad at me because I wrote something, people, mad at other writers, people excited, people, ticked about how this went down. They're talking about it. And so you have this platform so rarely that when you get it, take advantage of it. And I just think it was obviously I'm beating a dead horse, but I think it was a missed. Let me end it by saying I think it was a missed opportunity for Pat Kraft. I think it was a serious missed opportunity, and he had multiple chances. We gave him multiple chances to speak on the record, or offered multiple chances, and he declined to do it, which is his prerogative. Again, intelligent guy, but from my perspective, having been around this program forever, this program's only in the spotlight once every so often. And when it's in that spotlight, you better seize the moment. And I don't think they seized the moment.
Pat Kraft in the spotlight right now, that's for sure. Penn State fans watching very closely what happens next. What is the next move? And a lot of people want to see some kind of home run hire. I have no doubt about it. There is a major draw to responding to getting your lunch money stolen here by saying, you know what, I'm gonna go buy a surf and turf dinner at the finest restaurant in town, and you bring in some fancy new hire. But Daniel, locally here, the players have responded. They've made it clear they think the fit may be already in that team facility.
Yeah, we saw the outpouring on Twitter last night from the departing senior class. Andrew Funk, Cam Winter, Jalen Pickett, Miles Dredd, and then Sam Sessoms, who spent last year at the program before transferring to Coppin State.
There's an endorsement for you.
I know. They threw their weight behind Adam Fisher, the associate head coach for the past 2 years. He's a Penn State alum. He was a student manager in the mid-2000s, spent time as a graduate manager at Villanova under Jay Wright, came back to Penn State in the early 2010s, and before going to Miami, where he spent 8 years, the last 6 of which were as an assistant under Jim Larinaga. So he's someone who I talked to him a little bit last Friday in the locker room in Des Moines about what this meant to him as a Penn Stater to be on this type of run, at your alma mater, to be really elevating this program. And, he spoke very glowingly about, what this opportunity was like, what this experience was like, and kind of the overall, at this point in his career, having a family, having kids, having so many relatives that went to Penn State, having these connections to the program where he's hearing from players and coaches from the early 2000s and all different eras who were really excited about this run. So Fisher is someone who, when you talk about, trying to figure out how to sustain the success, maybe keeping some continuity, maybe trying to figure out how your roster isn't completely rated over these next couple of days and weeks. He is someone that I think you can look at. He has a track record of recruiting in Pennsylvania. He was on those Miami staffs when they got Lonnie Walker out of Reading, Isaiah Wong out of the Philadelphia area. Wong was the ACC Player of the Year this year. He does have some chops, but at the same time, it's similar with Shrewsberry, where it's a first-time head coach. So you're not necessarily sure, how someone does when they, make that jump. When you move over 2 seats on the bench, things change a lot. So I think that Fisher is someone who Penn State should certainly look at. He knows the landscape. At the same time, maybe he knows the landscape too well because he saw what Shrewsberry had to deal with. He knows what obstacles are in place. And you can almost be too close to something and know too much. So it'll be interesting to see how this shakes out. I do think Fisher is someone who at some point in his career, will become a head coach. Is that right now? Is that at Penn State? Is that in the Big Ten? I think we'll have to wait and see, but I do think it speaks loudly to see that kind of reaction from the players. But at the same time, those are the guys leaving. Haven't seen much from the guys who are sticking around, for next year and beyond.
It creates a little bit of a potential for, I don't know, maybe some divisiveness with that group of phenomenal, leaders, veterans who help become the face of this push. If you don't go that direction, now you can't just hire a guy because people like him in the building. That's not a surprise to hear. But I think, do you alienate those guys if you go in a different direction? They all did it within a few minutes of each other on the day that Micah Shrewsberry left for the Notre Dame job. They didn't beat around the bush and say, maybe you should interview the guy. They said, hire Adam Fisher. Love the entire senior core of the team that just won your first tournament game in 2 decades. So that's a big message they sent. But let's face it, Pat Kraft has to do his diligence. There's got to be some significant experience on this list as well. And where are we looking beyond State College? I know you listed a ton of names in your VIP rundown that came out on the site this morning, but give us a few that you think are particularly worth mentioning here for our listening audience.
I think Matt Langle from Colgate is one of the first names that popped up when you look at the profile of the guy who has had mid-major success making that leap forward. He's been at Colgate for a very long time and was given a ton of runway to really build that program up. I think they won 8 games in his first year. They won 26 games this year. He's won the Patriot League 5 straight times. I believe he would have been in the NCAA tournament 5 straight years. They play an efficient brand of basketball. They led the nation in 3-point percentage this year. I think they made about 8 per game, took about 20. And he's got some big upsets on his resume. Colgate beat Syracuse a couple times, and that really shook things up in Central New York, in that region. He's a Fran Dunphy guy from Penn and Temple. He played at Penn, from South Jersey, has those local roots. I think when you look at kind of the stepping stone, someone moving up the ladder, I think he is the first one that you think about. Late last night, there was a report from the Austin American-Statesman that Rodney Terry, the interim coach or the acting coach at Texas, had interest from Penn State and Cal. He is someone that we've seen do a really, really good coaching job this year in keeping a program together that really could have fallen apart after Chris Beard was fired. And we saw the coaching job that he did against Penn State, which was pretty impressive. So he is someone that popped up as well. And then looking at the mid-major ranks, Pat Kelsey from College of Charleston, when Pat Kraft was at Boston College, he hired Earl Grant away from College of Charleston. So there are some relationships there. It's a very long list, and there's a lot of directions that you could go with this. When I was making the list, I kind of thought about the different coaching archetypes, where you have the mid-major who's looking to make that leap up. You have the hot assistant, which is what Micah Shrewsberry kind of was 2 years ago. And then I think the most intriguing class of potential coach that you could look to is the sitting Power 6 or high major head coach. That's someone like Mike Rhodes at VCU. who was one of the best players ever at Lebanon Valley College, has ties to the area, has had success down in Richmond at a program with a basketball history. I think that is a very interesting avenue for Penn State to go, because if they were willing to pay Micah Shrewsberry to compete with a school like Notre Dame trying to take him away, you can do the logic that, well, if they're willing to spend that on Micah Shrewsberry now, they might be willing to spend that on someone who already has a head coaching job. So I think that Rhodes is someone who fits in that profile, where he's had success at VCU, made a couple tournaments. He has that head coaching experience, and is someone with ties to the area. So, I think that there's a lot of different types of coaches that Penn State could turn to. And I think it will be interesting. And I think it'll say a lot about what they think about the future of the program, depending on kind of which bucket they choose from.
I want to finish this basketball conversation with one more question for Mark, then we'll move on to some spring football talk. And we've got recruiting a little bit after that with Tyler Calvaruso. But Mark, Daniel brought up a good point there. There were promises and packages put together and presented to Micah Shrewsberry in an attempt to make this an appealing spot for him to stay. Now the question becomes, with seemingly the passion of the fan base spilling over into the coaching search from March Madness, are they going to maintain that kind of a high-reaching level of a package when it comes to promises they might be willing to make from the NIL standpoint, and what support might look like in different ways and that are strictly modern? There wouldn't have been a conversation 3 or 4 years ago when you're interviewing a candidate. Do you think how different do you think this will be compared to the coaching search that took place 2 years ago? And one, the intensity and focus from the Penn State community on it, and two, what Penn State might be willing to offer a candidate.
Yeah, I mean, I think it has to be, right? I mean, just for all the reasons that we talked about. I mean, if you're not viewing these things in a different way, just look at how different the whole landscape of college sports is over the last 2 years since the last hire. The one thing I would say is that if it's possible, you want to get somebody with regional roots. And when you talk about Langle, there's a guy from Morristown, New Jersey, went to Penn, was an assistant coach at Temple. When you talk about Adam Fisher, Daniel mentioned it. He's a Philadelphia area guy. He worked for Jay Wright at Villanova. Obviously, if you hire an Adam Fisher, I don't think you're going to have to worry about him being poached, because I think he's a Penn State guy kind of through and through. And obviously loves the university. He went here, was a longtime manager and then served in other functions. But so one thing we learned from James Franklin is I think that those Pennsylvania roots have been important to him staying here. So I think if you can do that, great. But Pennsylvania roots aside, just circle back to kind of where I started with all this. I think it has to be known that the commitment's going to be there. It just has to be known that the commitment's going to be there on the NIL front. And if it's not, I think you're going to be hamstrung. If you want consistent success in hoops, the NIL commitment is going to have to be there. And that message is going to have to get through to these candidates who they're interviewing. And again, as this unfolds, to the kids in the program and to the guys who are being recruited.
Does this seem like the moment where I don't know whether they're new or whether they just take a step up, but in terms of people contributing financial support to the program, this is where you could have a pivot point because of the passion around the program. And at the same time, if you don't get it, it's a pivot point another way, because even in this moment where there's this kind of rally cry among the people who really pay attention to Penn State basketball and love the program and support the program, if it doesn't happen now, I'd assume that leaves many with a very sour taste in their mouth.
Yeah, did they miss the moment? I mean, that's the point. I mean, did they miss the moment? So even if, and again, that's why maybe I'm not communicating it as well as I should, because it's a very difficult topic. But even if you weren't able to keep Shrewsberry, I think the message had to be put out there that, yeah, we're willing to do, or we need fans to be willing to do what it takes. And that's what's going to help keep a coach like Micah Shrewsberry. And then even if it doesn't happen, at least the message is out there and people understand, because I truly believe that a lot of people just don't understand. This NIL stuff is so complicated. And that's why, and that's why I keep talking about Pat Kraft. because he's such an effective communicator. He's the guy who has to communicate this. I'm saying it because I believe he's the guy who can do it. And I think that's one of the reasons why he's here. And you don't wait until after the fact to do it. So would it have worked? Maybe not. Maybe Micah Shrewsberry really did just want to go back to Indiana, but at least give it a try. And if not to keep Micah Shrewsberry, then to send a message to the next, to the potential next coach and to the kids who are still in the program and to potential recruits.
All right, we just brought a lot on the basketball coaching situation, and I thought it warranted it. We've been investing a lot more time into the basketball program for different reasons of late. Now we're doing it for another. We'll continue our coverage for this coaching search online, 247.com, and we'll catch up again on this a little bit later here in the month as we get our next episode up next week. But guys, spring football ongoing. Let's get back to it because obviously there's always going to be attention on Nittany Lions football. It doesn't matter what time of the year, but this is a particularly optimistic one annually with getting guys back on the practice field, getting a feel for some of the younger talent. And on Tuesday, we had a chance to hear from not just James Franklin, the head coach, but the offensive coordinator and Mike Yurcich, 5 different team veterans. It sounds like that's going to be the setup for us on each of these Tuesdays during spring ball, which we really appreciate. But we got a progress report from Mike Yurcich on all 3 of his quarterbacks, talking about their preparation. I thought it was really interesting to hear what he said about Aller and Prabula, the communications, being ready to orchestrate an offense on the practice field in a good spot there. And although it sounds like Jackson Smolik has some catching up to do, there was also some nice little nuggets dropped there from Yurcich in terms of the way he's gone out in the practice field and also been prepared, because that's important. They've only got 3 quarterbacks. They all sound like they're ready to challenge your defense, ready to do good things for your offense. And Mike Yurcich is whatever he throws out there in September, we expect it to be Drew Aller and a lot of Drew Aller. There's high expectations for this group. Sorry, I didn't specify who I was throwing that to.
Go ahead, Daniel. You could start.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you look at this quarterback room that they've put together, I think you're pretty lean on the experience, but you could be pretty long on the talent, depending on what the ceilings are for Drew Aller and Bo Prabula. And I think that we saw a little bit more of a relaxed Mike Yurcich, someone who was a little bit more, seemed a little bit more at ease, which I think maybe speaks to what he has right now in his room, how he feels about this offense and its potential. And so, I think that what we heard from Yurcich is what you want to hear at this point. You look at that quarterback room and there's a lot riding on it, both its performance on the field and its ability to really steer things in the locker room. James Franklin said that it's not only Drew Aller, the presumptive number 1 quarterback, needing to step up to be a leader, but some of that falls on the Prabula too, because those are the guys that the team is looking to. So, I think that at this point, the second week of spring practice, we're still, I don't know how, 5.5 months away from West Virginia, maybe. My math's bad on the months right now, but I think what we heard from Yurcich on Aller and Prabula and Smolik at this point in the year is what you want to hear, and things are pointed in the direction that you would want to see them be going.
Yeah, he called Smolik very poised, which is good to hear about a kid who should be finishing up high school right now, graduated early to get here in January. And then just on both Prabula and Aller, Yurcich says the indication to him is that when the lights are on, both of those guys naturally are ready to roll. And the lights are going to intensify in a big way come September. But it sounds like thus far, with Sean Clifford departing, it's a whole new world on this practice field for a lot of people, and this quarterback room handling it well. Mark, we've talked about receiver quite a bit here as a question, because there's a lot of talent that they've been able to stockpile in that room, but it was a different position coach there before. A lot of that talent has yet to develop into Big Ten production. And to this point, James Franklin says 2 veterans have separated themselves. Keandre Lambert-Smith, who was in his 4th year on campus, and then Harrison Wallace, now in year 3. And James Franklin went above and beyond to emphasize how he feels about Keandre Lambert-Smith this year. Says he needs to be a number 1 kind of wide receiver, not just a number 1 kind of wide receiver here in Happy Valley, but across the Big Ten, across the United States of America. Keandre Lambert-Smith afterward didn't shy away from it. He says that's what he needs to be. That's what he plans to be. And that would be a heck of a leap for a guy who was really absent from the stat sheet for a significant portion of last season until a late explosion.
Yeah, I wanted to mention one thing about the QBs. After spending time in Des Moines, I'm very confident that Jackson Smola can play in any sort of weather, that no matter what comes, freezing cold, rain, snow, wind, no matter what, if that kid was successful throwing the pigskin out there, look out, because that's some nasty weather. I'm for people who don't realize, the Penn State hoops was playing in Des Moines, and we were there, and the weather was not tremendous. Might have been slightly better in Sacramento or Orlando or wherever the heck. But no, listen, didn't we say it all last year about Keandre Lambert-Smith? It's like, when is this guy going to step up and be the consistent player that I think most people believed he could be? Now, would you have liked to have seen it from the beginning of the year through the end of the year on a consistent basis? Of course. But what I liked about that kid is, when Parker Washington got hurt, he elevated his game. Again, should he have done it earlier? Yeah, he should have been more consistent all along, but that was like the kind of aha moment. And then he gets stuff done late in the season, makes plays in the Rose Bowl, and I think that's great to carry on into spring practice. Loved the fact that he did not shy away. I mean, we've all had a chance to talk to him, and he's a super intelligent kid and very kind of self-aware. And he basically admitted that he hasn't lived up to his own standards. And his goal now is to be one of the top guys in the nation. He has the physical ability to do it. Does he have the consistency to do it? With respect to everybody else, I don't know. I mean, I go down that list, and, you know, you just look, and it's like, who else is going to step up? And that's what it basically boils down to. So Trey, yeah, I think he's going to be a guy. He's flashed. Amari Evans, I think, has just tremendous athletic ability. And then you look at McLean coming in as a transfer. And what did Mike Yursich say about him? Very mature guy, bringing a level of competitiveness to that room. And I think that's important when you have so many young guys. To bring that competitiveness and bring that fight when you're losing your two best receivers. So I think all that stuff, I think the players are there. It's just a matter of who is going to emerge. But I think the key guy is going to be Keandre Lambert-Smith, because, again, we know that he has the talent, but can he do it on a consistent basis?
And with Harrison Wallace, Trey Wallace, it sounds like that otherworldly athleticism that he's always had is really starting to get matched by more of a rounded out receiver talent now. And you combine those two, you start to think about what he could do for your downfield, putting up big gains at any moment. And one name that we're not listing there yet is Dante Cephas,
right,
who was a coveted transfer out of Kent State, will be joining this program before they get into preseason camp. And just one more note at the wide receiver spot, there's such a cluster of those young players that we're going to work through. But one name we haven't talked about, but he's been leading some of these wide receiver drills, or he's been near the front, Malik Mega. Let's not completely discount him. I know we've been quicker to go to the Omari Evans and Caden Saunders and Anthony Ivies of the world on this roster, but Mega's one of those wide receivers who's carved out a role at special teams. He's opted to stick with this team. We've seen a guy like Jaden Dotton leave the program, did not find his role in the field, but Mega, can he get it done on the offensive side of things with a new, fresh set of eyes in Marcus Hagans? Let's just monitor what he can do moving forward here in spring ball. And we did hear some early feedback, Daniel, on some freshmen, on some transfers. I just wanted to note that aside from McLean, the word on him generally from within that facility has been the size, and the size stands out. 6'4". That's obvious looking at his frame. He's a built 6'4", and also the competitiveness that goes back to day one of winter conditioning and now through the first 4 or 5 sessions of spring ball. But sounds like the comfort level still not quite there for him. He's making that transition to a new college field, to a new coaching staff, 2 new teammates, waiting for that part to set in and maybe other pieces get in place with him as an offensive component. Storm Duck sounds like it continues to be a seamless transition, approaching practice like a pro, certainly going to be pushing for an expanded role at cornerback. Johnny Dixon's vying for a starting job. Daquan Hardy's been here for a while. Cam Miller is on the come up in a big way, but Storm Duck has come here and asserted himself, been every bit the kind of all-conference caliber player he was down at North Carolina last year. But you heard some feedback on freshmen, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, Daniel, after practice on Tuesday.
Yeah, I chatted with Kobe King for a little while, and obviously I think there's a lot of excitement about Tony Rojas and some intrigue about Tamir Robinson and what they can bring. I think with Rojas, you saw him listed at, I think, 6'1", 195 pounds when he was announced on signing day, and you see that number in the weight column, and you start to think about, can he hold up at linebacker? But then after a couple of weeks of winter conditioning, he was listed at 214. And Kobe King said that it really shows on the field that Rojas has kept his athleticism. He's added the size that Kobe King said that you need to be able to play linebacker at Penn State, linebacker in the Big Ten. So I think that that's a pretty promising early return for someone who I think has a more unique skill set given what we saw him do as a running back at the high school level in Virginia. Robinson, every time I see him on the field, I think that, we saw him at Thon and he stood out for how big he was. Then you see him on the field, going through the linebacker drills with the rest of that position group. And he is just really, really physically impressive. Kobe King said that he's long and rangy and has the tools to play at the Mike position. I did float it to Kobe King. Do you think he sticks at linebacker long term? Because that's something that has come up here and there. And, Kobe King didn't really answer it, but he said that, he has what it takes to play Mike, in Manny Diaz's defense. So I think those are two guys that, are on a little bit different trajectories given Tamir Robinson coming off the injury that cost him some time in high school, Tony Rojas coming in and needing to bulk up. They're on a little bit different trajectories, but I think that those are two linebackers worth watching. And then Elliott Washington was someone that Zaki Wheatley brought up. He's another player that when we were at the Max Out Day really stood out to me physically as an early enrollee freshman, coming in from high school and already being really built physically. And it sounds like from what Zaki Wheatley said that is really carried over onto the field too. So he is someone who I think that, over time that you're going to notice, that we're going to hear more about, and that, as we see more practice, as we see the blue-white game, as we get into the fall, might pop a little bit.
I've heard from 5 different people through 5 practices about what Elliott Washington has looked like thus far, and the physicality everyone's talking about, him bench pressing receivers, and that's not really what you usually hear about a freshman cornerback. It's a little bit different, and it lends me to believe that even in a very crowded and competitive cornerback room, Terry Smith may have someone else burning red shirt by the time they get into mid-October. It seems to happen every year with a cornerback in that group. Just quickly circling back to that freshman group, Javen Williams, Alex Birchmeyer continue to rep at tackle. Both of those guys heard from about Anthony Donka Anthony Donka, heard from Salim Wormley on those 3. He says that Javen Williams maybe a little bit behind Donka and Birchmeyer in terms of the intelligence playbook aspect of what's required to be a Big Ten lineman, but he says Javen Williams' athleticism from the moment he set foot on campus and really now they put on the pads stands out in a big way. He says it reminds him a lot of Rasheed Walker, who, third year on campus here, a lot of us were projecting him as a potential first-round pick in the NFL as Penn State's left tackle. Didn't shape out that way, but that's where he was as an athletic specimen at the tackle position. So some names to keep in mind there. We'll continue to monitor their progress. Khalil Dinkins continues to get some love from this coaching staff in terms of what he's doing with an expanded reps over at tight end. We've discussed it. Tyler Horn and Theo Johnson not out there thus far in our looks at practice. That was anticipated a bit. Nothing necessarily concerning to the point long term, but thus far haven't seen them active. That's meant more work for the third-year tight end. And then Keziah Izzard, James Franklin mentioned this, bumps and bruises with him coming in, not going to be an active participant, but saw him out there getting some movement drills in. He was in sweatshirts and a jersey, guy who was a really important piece for them at defensive tackle last year. One more note before we get to Tyler Calvaruso. We got Pro Day. Normally, we probably would have dedicated a preview segment here. We just don't have the time on this particular episode, so we're going to go full throttle into a full recap episode, and we'll have coverage into the weekend. It starts Friday morning here on campus. We will all be in attendance for that, and here's the list of participants. Barney Amore, Jair Brown, Sean Clifford, PJ Mustipher, Jake Pinniger, Joey Porter Jr., Juice Scruggs, Chris Stoll, Bretton Strange, Jonathan Sutherland, Nick Tarburton, Mitchell Tinsley, and Parker Washington. So those are the names that will be in the focus for NFL scouts and coaches in Happy Valley on Friday. We'll have you filled in with all the details at Lions247.com. And on our next episode of the podcast, we'll have some fun discussing what guys did for their NFL draft stock. Mark, Daniel, appreciate the high-quality basketball coverage as always. I'll be continuing to follow along as this coaching search really gets underway at Lions247.com.
Thanks.
Thanks, Tyler.
All right, let's bring in Tyler Calvaruso now, and we've got football recruiting conversations to get into. There are some official visits being scheduled. There are more visits lined up for this upcoming weekend, but I want to bring you into the loop on basketball. I know people don't necessarily know your background in that sport, but you've got some pretty extensive coverage of college basketball's landscape. You've got a good feel for it, and I know that you and Daniel were in a lot of communication as he was putting together his board of potential candidates for this job. From a recruiting perspective, from a transfer portal angle, those are the two things that you cover so well for us, and you've done that for the basketball end too. What is hanging in the balance in this moment for the Nittany Lions?
It's a tough loss, man, for a couple reasons. Just think about the style that Micah Shrewsberry plays. It's more of a modern style of basketball, and it's a lot more modernized than a lot of programs in the Big Ten who kind of opt to, grind out games, win with their defense, more older, 1980s, 1990s type stuff. Pickett, I mean, just look at what Jalen Pickett was able to accomplish under Shrewsberry in that system. It kind of speaks for itself, right? And that was something that recruits really, really liked about Micah Shrewsberry's Penn State program. It was a modernized offense. It was something that you could go to Penn State and not only play in an offense that produces at a high level in the college ranks, but it prepares you for the professional level as well. That was something that appealed to recruits. So big loss for Penn State in that regard. I'm sure a lot of Big Ten coaches are happy Shrewsbury's out of there, so they don't have to deal with that system and have to deal with recruiting against that system. And then from a transfer portal perspective, it kind of puts everything on pause, because what veteran college basketball player is realistically going to come into a situation where there's not a head coach in place? You just don't know what your role is going to be. You don't know what system you're going to be going into. Sure, you could look at a roster and you could look at a depth chart and see where minutes are available regardless of a coaching situation. But at the end of the day, without a head coach established or a head coach in place, it's tough to say as a transfer portal player, hey, look, I'm going to go to Penn State. Whoever's the coach is the coach. That's just not something a lot of guys are going to do. So I would say everything's really on hold with Penn State basketball on a recruiting end right now. And you got to keep an eye on, the 2023 signees as well, the three guys that they signed. Shrewsbury's son, I mean, that kind of speaks for itself in this situation right now. There hasn't been any strong indication either way what's going to happen there, but you could kind of put 2 and 2 together in a spot like that. Logan Imes is also another interesting one, considering he's from Indiana. He played AAU with Shrewsbury's son, and you don't know. He's considering his options right now, so we're gonna have to keep an eye on him as well. And then Kerry Booth, I think, is kind of an outlier in this sense, just given who he is and who his father is and what his ties are to the Penn State program. They go beyond a coaching staff. So there hasn't really been any indication with him either what he's thinking or what his plans are. And if that changes, obviously we'll have that for you guys. But I think Penn State right now is in a pretty decent spot to keep him, just given the ties that he has to the school itself that go beyond a coaching staff or a specific coach himself.
All right, it's never on pause with Penn State football recruiting, so let's dive in there, because official visits starting to sneak up on us. We've been, this spring window has proved so vital to getting those summer commitments over the last few years since they put these spring visits into the schedule for college football. So Jamonte Waller, not only did he soar up 24/7 sports rankings, there's a new top 24/7 out for the 2024 class as of just about 36 hours ago. We'll get into that a little bit later, but he was a new 5-star, and he's also a new addition to the official visit guest list for Penn State.
Yeah, he'll be on campus starting June 9th for his official. That's shaping up to be a pretty big official visit weekend for Penn State. I know it's in March, and we're talking about June official visit. It's looking like it's going to be a big weekend or not be a big weekend, but June 9th is already standing out. It's going to be guys like Waller, Vabu Toure, the safety from Irvington. He's a 4-star guy Penn State really likes a lot. And with Waller, it's not crazy to think that Penn State leads for him. I know it might seem that way on the surface, given he's from Mississippi. He's got offers to play from pretty much everywhere at this point. 5-star edge. Penn State's looking at him as more of a will linebacker, not an edge. I know a lot of schools are after him as an edge. Not the case in Happy Valley. More of a will linebacker, a dual Carter, outside linebacker type role. Penn State likes him for, and he's been very receptive to that pitch. Likes Manny Diaz a lot, likes the scheme. And he's a big Micah Parsons fan. That matters in this recruitment. I think that he really sees himself wearing that number 11 one day. And it's still really early for him because he's kind of – I don't want to say he's blown up recently, because this has kind of been a long time coming for him once that junior year tape started to circulate. And he was already on radars way before then. Ole Miss offered him way before that big junior year where he dominated competition. So he's going to be on campus for that official. And it goes without saying it's a huge opportunity for Penn State. I mean, not only are we talking about a high-end prospect from SEC country coming to campus, we're talking about one who's already very clearly established that Penn State is a top contender for him kind of like TJ Parker last year out of Alabama. I know it didn't work out for Penn State in the end, but getting him on campus was a really big deal, and Penn State ultimately closed on him for a little bit. I think they're going to have the same chance to do that with Waller, and I think they're going to have a really good chance to keep him on board if they do get him as well.
Man, I know people are probably going to have visions of Tamarian Parker if he were to commit, and every day between then and when they got to the signing day, because that would be such an – I don't want to call it an outlier, but there's just not a lot of teams that can go into that area and come away with it. Yeah, I guess that is an appropriate term, because whether it's an Ohio State or a Notre Dame or a Michigan or even a USC, to go into that region and get a player of that caliber when you've got all those sharks circling around down there in that conference,
no doubt,
that would just be a remarkable win. But we've got a long way to go there. But they're setting the stage for something like that, certainly putting themselves in position to be in that kind of a conversation down at the end of this recruitment. Let's go to another defender in Maryland, Xavier Gilliam. Not only will he be on campus this weekend, it's going to be another pretty busy weekend here in Happy Valley, but he's also got an official visit lined up in June. What do you make of the prospect who's a 3-star caliber as of now in rankings on our site?
He does. So he's going to be on campus this weekend for an unofficial, and he's going to circle back for a June 2nd official visit. That's the first weekend of June where officials will be going down. So he'll be one of the first guys to take a summer official visit to Penn State. Intriguing prospect, got a basketball background as well. There's a lot of athleticism to his game. Penn State's after a lot of quality edges. He's one of them. It's a really crowded board, to be completely honest with you. It's something that we've talked about plenty. Deion Barnes has kind of hit the ground running here. He's established a lot of good relationships, and Penn State's in play for a lot of top-end pass rushers, Gilliam being one of them, it looks like right now. So we're going to have an eye on what other trips he makes. Virginia Tech's in the running there. I know he's going to be at Liberty. That's one of the other visits that he mentioned in Brian Dome off the top of my head. So interesting prospect. I like the athleticism coming off the edge. I think he's got a pretty good first step. Definitely a name for Penn State fans to know moving forward. We'll see how that June 2nd official visit plays out, and we're also going to see what comes about this weekend. This is going to be his first time watching Deion Barnes work in person. So that's something that I've been keeping a really close eye on personally whenever I'm catching up with all these defensive line targets, because a lot of them already knew Barnes, just through conversations and, phone calls, but they've gotten to know him. They're comfortable with him on a personal level. But then they get to campus to see him work with the defensive linemen and how he interacts with his guys and just how he is with them on the practice field, during drills, during team periods. There's a lot that goes into it. So that's something that I've had a really close eye on, and I'll have a close eye on that in this recruitment as well.
We've talked a lot about the potential for these spring practice visits, even going back to those January junior days, being a stepping stone toward the official visit happening in June. That is the process that took place for Kai Greer. Was on campus, really enjoyed himself last weekend, it sounds like, based on your commentary. And now he's locked in for a return trip, and it's going to be an official visit.
Yeah, Greer called Penn State one of his top choices coming out of the weekend trip. Really liked Phil Troutwing coming out of that. Again, I just talked about with Deion Barnes, how he interacted with his guys on the practice field. That was something that really stood out to Greer with Trout. So he's going to get back to this official. I would say this is an official visit that's going to be more of an emphasis on away from football, what Penn State has to offer, academically. That's something Greer's really big on. He just told me that he's really looking forward to getting back and learning more, not only about the program, but just as a school and what Penn State is about as an institution. So he's going to be on campus, not June 9th, not June 2nd, but June 17th. I believe that's one of the first June 17th official visits we have locked in. Kaj Saunders from Bergen Catholic, I believe, is another one who's going to be on campus June 17th. So Greer will have some company. But North Carolina guy, I like his tape too. I think there's a lot to like with his game. He's got some versatility to him. He can play on the outside. He can play interior. I know Penn State's looking at him on the interior right now. I'm not necessarily saying that he's high, like top target on the interior, but he's definitely up there. Penn State likes him a lot, and there's definitely a lot to like about his game. So going to be a pretty intriguing official visit, and we're going to have to see how that board comes about as well, because we've talked about guys like William Satterwhite repeatedly on this podcast, now high Penn State is on him. He's coming to town in late April. So there's a lot of moving pieces at that position, specifically with the interior. Greer, he's definitely under heavy consideration, though, and it speaks to that with the official visit being scheduled.
6'6", 285 pounds, out of Marvin Ridge High School in Waxhaw, North Carolina, the number 30 interior offensive lineman in 24/7 sports rankings for the 24 class. There's another offensive line offer out, Aiden Lynch. We'll skip through that one because we're running short on time, and I want to get to what the visits look like. You had a story up on Lynch at Lions247.com, but what does this weekend look like in terms of high school visitors? I got something to talk about in just a second about a transfer visitor, but what are we looking at from the high school ranks coming to town in the next few days?
So, like I said earlier this week, not necessarily as big of a weekend as last weekend, but still got some pretty intriguing names coming to campus. It starts really tomorrow. Corey Smith, he's a top 24/7 running back from Wisconsin. He's expected to make his way to campus. We touched on Gilliam. A lot of younger guys making it to campus this week. 2024 defensive lineman Jalen Hicks, who has an offer as well. He's from New Rochelle, Iona Prep, New York defensive lineman. Pretty good player. He's got an offer. He's been catching up with Deion Barnes ever since he got the hire. Good relationship forming there. But a lot of younger guys making it to campus this weekend from what we've gathered. A lot of 2025s and 2026s. One 2025 I like a lot is DJ McClary, linebacker from Jersey. Plays his ball at Snyder. Pretty productive season he's coming off of. He was on campus for the Maryland game in November. Picked up his offer from the Nittany Lions then. He's been high on them ever since. Talks to Gabe Infante a lot. He's looking forward to getting to campus. And then we go to the 2026s. Guys like Savion Hyder, Dajier Carter, their teammates down in Virginia. They're going to be making the trip. That's the expectation. So a lot of younger guys making their way to campus this weekend. It's going to be another really important weekend because Penn State's always trying to lay the groundwork during these spring practice sessions. They want to sell these guys not only while they're on campus, but getting them back to campus. They want to make sure they have a good enough time to where coming back to Happy Valley is strongly on their radar. So that's the goal for the staff this weekend. Do what you got to do with these guys while they're on campus and make sure, hey, look, I want to come back to Penn State at some point in the near future.
And the transfer portal, always looming in college football. Had a story up on Wednesday over at Lions247.com about an anticipated visitor on Saturday for this practice for Penn State. Trey Potts, a familiar name. He was here in Happy Valley last fall as a member of the Minnesota Golden Gophers roster. Backup running back to Ibrahim Traore there. Ibrahim Traore. Look at me mentioning a Penn State lineman. Mohamed Ibrahim, the backup to Mohamed Ibrahim over at Minnesota. Obviously, he was a workhorse running back for the Golden Gophers last year. Potts the last couple of seasons in a backup role. The year before, kind of a committee role when Ibrahim was out with an injury. So about 1,100 yards, 11 touchdowns in his career at Minnesota. Guy who's looking for a fresh start. He's got 2 years of eligibility when you factor in that COVID year. Out of Williamsport area high school. And so you're looking at a player who has a familiarity with Penn State. He was on campus as a prospect, didn't pick up an offer, signed with Minnesota, had a couple Ivy League offers on the table. Schools like Rutgers and Syracuse had offers there for him. The last couple years of his high school career were impacted by injury issues. Didn't get to develop a ton of film as an upperclassman, still put up huge numbers at the high school level for Williamsport. But an interesting one that surfaces here. Penn State has 2 scholarship running backs. They're very good ones in Nick Singleton and Katron Allen. They've got 2 more coming in as freshmen here this summer in London Montgomery and Cam Wallace. But there certainly may be a need for depth, but you got to wonder from Potts' perspective, is it the right fit for him, knowing what those 2 accomplished last year? It's a guy who had to sit behind a very talented running back and wait his turn for a while in Minneapolis. But perhaps it's a marriage that might be worth making for both sides. We'll see what comes out of this visit, but something that we put on the site yesterday, wanted to mention it here on the podcast. If that visit comes to fruition, certainly something to monitor moving forward. Tyler, we just got about a minute on this one, but what stood out to you about the top 24/7 rankings that dropped this week for the 24 class? And Cooper Cousins, of course, featured in those.
Cousins staying in a pretty good spot. That's good for Penn State. Waller made a huge jump. That was really impressive. Kind of expected that, but he's a high-end prospect. What really stood out to me putting together an article on it was how many top 24/7 guys Penn State is after this cycle. And that's natural, but it feels like even more so than last cycle. They're heavily involved with a lot of top-tier guys. So Penn State in a good spot with its 2024 board from a talent perspective, that's for sure.
You've got the whole write-up there at Lions247.com. We've got the rankings up available for everyone. And Cooper Cousins at 198 overall in the top 24/7 as things stands ahead of his still a junior. We're still ways off from his senior year. These rankings will continue to fluctuate and progress. Tyler, really appreciate your perspective as always. I know there's a ton of stuff we could have gotten into. We had to focus on this basketball move to begin the show. So we'll look at more of your coverage next week coming out of more visits. And there's a lot of stuff of yours right now up on Lions247.com for our VIP subscribers.
Yeah, we'll have a lot to talk about. That's for sure.
All right, take care. Big thanks to Tyler Calvaruso. Big thanks to Mark Brennan and Daniel Gallen. It's all hands on deck this week with what has gone on in Happy Valley. We are back on the practice field next Tuesday. Another look at Penn State in football action. We'll have James Franklin. We'll have a coaching staff member. We'll have multiple players again to speak with. So another exciting week of spring practice coverage. But before we get there, remember Friday, pro day. NFL scouts are in town. Big opportunity for these outgoing Nittany Lions. We will be on the turf with these guys and getting a chance to speak with them after the action on Friday. So follow our coverage at lions247.com. We'll talk to you real soon. Stepping aside for now, I am Tyler Donohue. This has been the Lions 24/7 podcast.